welcome to the second Hayley-Roxanna Crafts quick crochet video, where I share information, hints and tips on one area of crochet in a short video. In this video, I'm focusing on the yarns and hooks that can be used for crocheting. There are many different yarns that can be used to crochet, and the yarn you choose to use can also determine which hook to use. In this video, I'm going to share some of the common yarns and hooks used, along with some tips that may help, especially if you are a beginner. Not only does yarn for crochet come in a variety of colours, it also comes in a variety of sizes, thicknesses and blends too. Yarn is sometimes just called wool, especially in the UK. People will say about going to the wool shop. But yarn is the more general term, as not all yarn is made from wool. So for example, this yarn is an acrylic yarn. This yarn is cotton. And this one is a nylon and wool mix. There's all sorts of other blends as well that you can get. And as you can see, the sizes of the balls or skeins of yarn can also vary. Some of this can be due to the thickness of the actual yarn. So both of these are 50-gram balls, but clearly the sizes are different. But you can also get different weights. So these are both premium acrylic yarns. One's 50 grams and one comes in 100 grams. You can also get balls of yarn in 200 and 400 grams, and even smaller weights as well, like a 25-gram ball, but I haven't got any of those at the moment. The actual meters of yarn you will get in a ball will depend on the thickness. A thinner yarn, you will get more meters. See if I can see where it says on here. So this you get approximately 295 meters. Whereas 100 gram in a thicker yarn, you would only get approximately 144 meters. So you wouldn't get quite as much yarn, although the weights would be the same. The different thicknesses of the yarns have different names. However, this can vary depending on country, even though there are actually standard yarn weights. So this yarn, for example, would be a size 6 yarn. But in the UK, we call that super chunky. And in the US, I believe it would be called super bulky. So this would be the size 5 yarn, which is chunky in the UK or bulky in the US. This is a size 4 yarn, which is known as Aran in the UK, but in the US it is known as worsted. These yarns here, and that one, these are all size 3 yarns, and these are actually known as double knitting or DK yarns in both the UK and the US. It's one of the few that is actually the same. And then lastly, I've got a size 2 yarn, which in the UK is known as 4-ply, but in the US would be known as sport. There are other countries, such as Australia, who just use the number of ply to refer to the yarns. So the larger the number, the thicker the yarn. And there's probably other variations as well. But that's all the yarn I've got. So how do you decide which yarn to use? That comes down to what you are trying to make, what the pattern says you should use, and your personal choice. Some people prefer to just use acrylic yarn, whereas some want a wool blend. Like I said, personal choice. If you are a beginner and you just want to see if you can crochet and are just experimenting with trying the different stitches, I would advise to start by using a DK yarn, but in a light colour. So I certainly wouldn't use a black or a navy or something dark like that when starting out, as this can make the stitches hard to see. Something else to bear in mind when buying yarn is the batch number or dye lots of the colour. So if we look on this ball of DK yarn, you can see on the details it gives you the colour, but there's also a dye number. And this number tells you which balls of yarn were dyed that particular colour at the same time. So why is this important? If the project you are making requires more than one ball of a particular colour, then ideally you want them to be from the same batch or dye lot to guarantee that they are the exact same colour. Sometimes, even though two balls are called the same colour, if they're from different batches or dye lots, they may differ slightly. So these two whites are both from the same dye lot, whereas these creams are actually from different lots. Okay. The difference between these creams isn't really noticeable, so I'm happy to use them in the same project, but sometimes the difference can actually be really obvious, and especially if you are using the two different balls next to each other in the project, it can be quite obvious, and this can actually spoil the look of your finished project, which is why it's always worth making sure that if you're buying yarn for a project, try and get the colours from the same batch lots or dye lots. Once you know what yarn you're going to use, you then need to choose your crochet hook. As you can see, crochet hooks come in a variety of styles and sizes. They can be made from metal, wood, plastic. They can be metal coated in a plastic. They may have grips on them in different styles of grip. But the size of the actual hooks will always be the same to the actual standard size. So if I pick up 2, 3, these 3 hooks, they are all 4mm hooks. So the actual hooks are the same size, but the styles of them are different. In the UK, hook sizes are given in millimetres, but in the US and other countries they may be labelled with a number or a letter instead. Conversion charts can be found online to ensure you are using the correct size hook for the project you're working on. Which size hook you will actually need depends on a few factors. Firstly, on the labels of yarn, often a hook size will be suggested. So if we take a look here on this chunky yarn, it suggests I don't think I can get it in for you to be able to see clearly, but it says a 6mm hook. So that would be that size. Whereas on this DK yarn, it suggests a 4mm hook. So that was the size that I was holding up before. On this yarn, it doesn't actually say a hook size, but it does say the needle size for if people are knitting. And I usually use that as a guide as to what hook size to use. It's usually about the same as the needle. So this one again would be a 4mm one. However, patterns sometimes call for you to use either a larger or a smaller hook than what's suggested on the labels. And the tension how tight or loose you crochet can also affect the size of hook to use. If you are a tight crocheter, you may need to go up a size to achieve the required size of a crocheted piece. But if you are a loose crocheter, you may need to go down a size. It can also come down to your personal choice as you become more experienced. As a beginner, if you are using DK yarn, then I would start with a 4mm hook if you're just trying out stitches. But if you're finding it difficult to see the stitches, then it might be worth going up to a 4.5 hook or even a 5mm hook, just to make it easier while you're learning and practicing. I would also suggest trying different styles of hooks where possible to determine what's comfortable for you. I prefer these hooks with the grips on them to metal hooks, but my mum prefers crocheting with the metal hooks. She doesn't like the ones with the grips on. So it's all personal preference and what works for you. If you have any questions about the yarns and hooks for crochet, please pop them in the comments. And in next week's video, I will demonstrate how to do a slip knot.